third day of the Gaza Tribunal. Welcome everyone, and today the main topic is the complicity, international system, resistance, and solidarity. We will be discussing this in length, and at the end of the day, we will make a conclusion. As a first, we will start with the opening statements of conscience. And Mr. Tamim al-Barghouti will be speaking to us. Tamim, do you hear us?
Me?
Good. Mr. Tamim, you can start. The time is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thank you for your moral stand that is essential for our collective survival as humans, like every moral stand in our joint history. People who speak truth to power are the very engine of our survival. Evil, as anyone who studies law would tell you, if left unchecked, can bring down the entire human civilization. And while one should avoid simplistic dichotomies of good and evil, there are moments in human history where such dichotomies present themselves and are undeniable. What has happened in Palestine and what has been happening for the past 77 years is simply an act of armed robbery and an act of apartheid and discrimination. Discriminating among human beings based on elements that they did not choose, on how they were born, where they were born, the color of their skin, any attribute that is unchangeable cannot be the basis for punishing human beings. And Palestinians are being punished only for being born, the most common attribute of all humans. They were just born there, and they were not of the ethnic or religious group that the settlers and invaders and their backers favored. If Palestinian refugees or the people of Gaza or the people of the West Bank were to have a different religion tomorrow by an act of magic, theoretically, they would be granted all the rights that they are now denied. They would be granted Israeli citizenship. In fact, Israel is the only state in the world that grants citizenship based on inherited religion. Hence, Israel is constitutionally racist, is constitutionally discriminatory, and therefore constitutionally wrong as an idea. It elevates one religious narrative over all others in a land that is holy to all those religious narratives. It also engineers a majority by force of arms, an unnatural majority. Today, for the past 2 years, Israel has been trying to effect a new Nakba, a new ethnic cleansing of Palestine. The very fact that after 77 years, Israel finds itself in need of a new Nakba is evidence that the first Nakba has failed. And if the first Nakba failed, it is very likely that any later attempt to do the same would fail also, because it's much more difficult to displace 7 million Palestinians from mandatory Palestine, whether in Gaza, the West Bank, or in the land that was occupied in 1948. It's much more difficult to displace that number today than displacing 1/10 of that number 77 years ago. It was easier 77 years ago to do so in the aftermath of World War II and all the atrocities that happened then. And it was easier to displace them to countries that at the time were in all but name British and French colonies with smaller populations, weaker governments, and a situation of regional flux. So the displacement, the transfer, the ethnic cleansing the genocide today has failed and will fail. The Palestinian people have endured extreme pain, unprecedented in the history of this conflict. Yet they have not been defeated. The people coming back to the ruins of their homes to pitch their tents on them were more in number than the people who were forced to leave their ruined homes 77 years ago. And that scene in and by itself speaks to the entire world that the project of displacing and replacing the people of Palestine with foreign settlers, that act of armed robbery has failed and will continue to fail. The violence that we have been experiencing is just, in my view, a historical reaction to the realization that the project of occupying Palestine, of creating this entity, this foreign entity in Palestine, has failed and has no future. And the more people realize this and try to find ways that save human lives of every faith, to bring this atrocity to an end, the better for everyone. I want to end by saying that the meaning of Palestine, the millennial meaning of Palestine, is what you are standing for. See, Palestine is a narrow strip of land between the sea and the desert, surrounded by two river-fed lands in Iraq and Egypt that historically supported larger populations and were the bases of ancient empires. Palestine was close enough to those empires to be controlled by them, but not close enough to be assimilated in them. And those ancient empires had kings who claimed divinity, impunity. And therefore, it is not by coincidence that the idea of monotheism found grounds in Palestine. The political implication of monotheism is the denial of the divinity of kings, by stating that the divine is not of this world. All kings are stripped of divine power. It's a revolutionary idea. And Palestine, therefore, has an anti-imperialistic meaning ingrained in its geography and in its history. Whoever is faithful to this idea of opposing tyranny and impunity belongs to Palestine. That would make you all Palestinians today. And whoever betrays this and becomes a pawn of empire, a pawn of might against right, or believes that might makes right, that he has the power of gods to give and take life and to say, according to his own whims, what is right and wrong, is the antithesis of Palestine. And therefore, the history of Palestine, the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim history bears witness, like you do, against Israel and against Zionism and against genocide and against ethnic cleansing. When the people of Palestine decided to, when some of the people of Palestine decided to attribute divinity to a human, he was not an emperor. He was the rebel against the emperor. His throne was the cross. His crown was made of thorns. The crown of thorns is now worn by the people of Palestine. Palestine being their cross, but also their throne. And this pain is the sign of their victory. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Alberguti. And now we will be hearing Mr. Tiago Avila in his statement of conscience. Mr. Avila, do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you very well. Can you hear me?
Good. We can hear you too. Good morning one more time, and the time is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning to all of the participants of the Gaza Tribunal. This is a very, very important initiative. I'm sending you my kind regards here from the Global South. I'm in Brazil right now with my baby daughter, and we are here after we were part of the Global Sumut Flotilla. I'm a member of the steering committee. You have also another member of our steering committee at the event who speak today, Yasmin Ajar. And we were part of a mission, of a solidarity, non-violent humanitarian mission to break the illegal siege of Gaza and an attempt to create a perennial humanitarian corridor not under control by the occupying entity that is occupying Palestine. I've been dedicated to the Palestinian cause for over 20 years now. And over 20 years, I had the same shock that I see a lot of people having for the last 2 years. Back then, I was watching the occupying plan, the reallocation plan of Gaza, when Ariel Sharon was removing the Zionist colonies from Gaza. And I could not understand that. I said, why is that happening? Because as far as I know, they are trying to take over the land. So how come they are taking away these colonies? And the next year I understood when they escalated the genocide in 2006, and then bombed Gaza, and they bombed and tried to invade Lebanon once again and were defeated. And in the year after, in 2007, when they established this illegal siege by land, by sea, and by air. And then I understood that they removed the colonies of Gaza because the plan they had for Gaza was even more cruel than the plan they had for the West Bank. Was not only by taking over, doing the land grabs and taking over settlement by settlement, colony by colony, but was turning Gaza into the world's biggest concentration camp and now extermination camp. So it was very sad to see that. And once I understood that, I knew that I had to be there in support for these people. I was not that aware at the beginning, 20 years ago, of how was the inside, how was the mentality, the mindset, how was the understanding of the Palestinian people of the resistance. I knew that I was understanding and I was seeing there a colonization project. And now we can say very clearly there's been 8 decades of genocide and ethnic cleansing, which structured itself into an apartheid colonial state, and which is led not by a religion, like I always thought in my young days, but by an ideology, a racist and supremacist ideology called Zionism. To understand this is to decipher the real meaning of the messages and to understand why we are dealing with a rogue state that really has no regard by international law. 20 years ago, I was so frustrating. I would say, how come they don't respect the Resolution 194 of the right of return? How come since Resolution 181 in 1947, they didn't respect, they were already taking and stealing 53%, almost 54% of the Palestinian land by then. And only 2 years later, in 1949, they were already stealing 78% of the Palestinian territory of historical Palestine. And they were never satisfied because this colonization project is very expansionist. It's very, very harmful for the world, not only for the Palestinian people. So I was so frustrated to see that they really had no respect and no regard by anything. The same frustration that I see in millions of young people today when they see the Zionist entity bombing hospitals, schools, shelters, starving children to death, when they see that never before so many UN workers have been killed. Never before so many medical workers have been killed. Never before so many civil defense, so many journalists have been killed. Because this colonization project has no limits at all on its greed, not only to take over and dominate Palestine, but also to establish not only there on the region, but all around the world, its horrific racist and supremacist ideology. So when we see an initiative like the Gaza Tribunal, we understand that is the most important thing that we can do right now. Because for 20 years, I've been listening the same accusations, the correct accusations of what happens in Palestine. When I was in Palestine in person, I've seen that myself. The checkpoints, the racist laws, the national Jewish law, the national basic law that says that there is an ethnic state for the Jewish people. Therefore, racial and religious discrimination regime there, where children of 14 years were imprisoned in administrative detention without any rights, and when they were judged by military courts, and because depending on their ethnic group or your religion or your nationality, you didn't have the same rights in this horrific apartheid state. So we've seen so many violations. But what changed is that for 2 years now, not only Palestine remained being the moral compass of the world, but the world began a global uprising. An uprising that started by denouncing the genocide and in full solidarity with the Palestinian people against this genocide, but also escalated into a way of understanding and a way of denouncing not only the genocide, but the system that enables genocide. This system that exploits, oppresses, and destroys nature in a systemic way, not only in Palestine, but in Sudan, in Congo, that creates ecocides in the Amazon forest, right where I am, that exploits the entire 99% of the workers of the world. So this system is now at stake. And when Trump had to give up on his total ethnic cleansing that he was defending 1 month ago only, to say that Netanyahu cannot fight the whole world alone, is because he understood that the people of the world can never be defeated, because they are inspired and they are mobilized and they are answering a call to action by the most resilient, steadfast, and amazing people of the world, which is the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people who are not there to be saved by anyone. They're actually the ones saving the world by giving back the world their humanity, by giving a lens to see society as it really is. So exposing the corrupt and crumbling system where they had for so long told us that they were the beacons of liberty, the beacons of democracy, the beacons of human rights, when they are terrible and cruel dictatorship of the capital and of this imperialist system. So the Palestinian gave us the lenses, but also gave us the map, that in order to live in a different society, that someday we will be able to build a society of social justice, a society where people have real happiness, real dignity, where children does not need to know the sound of an F-35 fighter jet, or the sound of a quadcopter drone that may kill you, or the sound of a surveillance drone, or the effects of starvation in your organism, in your body. We need to be like the Palestinian people. We need to be steadfast. We need to remain. We need to make sure that no evil, no hegemonic power, no military industrial complex can defeat you. So we are here to learn from the Palestinian people, to be inspired by them. And thank you so much for the Gaza Tribunal for being a tool to show us the way. International law has pretty much collapsed right now, but the Palestinian people, this global uprising, are rebuilding international law based on what is really right, what is really just, and there's no peace without true justice, and that's what we need to build right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Avila. Thank you for your statement of conscience. We will continue now with the first topic this morning, media, states, university, and corporate complicity. And the first speaker for this morning is Ms. Katie Halper. Katie will be speaking about media complicity. And after her speech, we will also see a video.
"15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli.
Hello, everybody. And thank you so much to the jury for having me here. My name is Katie Helper. I'm a journalist, filmmaker, and the host of YouTube shows, podcasts, and a radio show. And I'm here to speak in my capacity as an analyst of Western corporate media. I'm also here as someone who personally experienced Western corporate media censorship and cancellation. In 2020, while working as a co-host of Hill TV's show Rising, I prepared a daily monologue in which I argued that Israel was an apartheid state. The producers refused to air my segment, and when I urged them to do so, they responded by letting me go from a show I had been on for over 2 years. That was 5 years ago. In the last 2 years since October 7th, American media coverage of the war on Gaza has not only remained biased, but, along with Western corporate media, I will argue, has been complicit in genocide. Western corporate media's complicity is so pervasive and in some cases quantifiable. It often uses passive voice and non-attribution in headlines to describe Israel's killing of Palestinians. It uses emotive language to describe the deaths of Israelis. In November 2023, the New York Times sent a memo to its reporters telling them not to use the words genocide, ethnic cleansing, or occupied territory. It even cautioned against the use of refugee camp. In late October and early November, CNN emailed its reporters to, quote, remind our audiences of the immediate cause of this current conflict, namely the Hamas attack and mass murder and kidnap of Israeli civilians. It also said Hamas representatives are engaging in inflammatory rhetoric and propaganda. Most of it has been said many times before and is not newsworthy. We should be careful not to give it a platform. Because of time limits, I will focus in particular on the way Western corporate media manufactured consent for genocide through its selective and dishonest coverage of rape and sexual assault, which didn't merely misrepresent reality, but inverted it in order to dehumanize Palestinians. The corporate Western media spread the lie that Hamas engaged in mass systematic campaign of rape and sexual assault on October 7th. This same media ignored the documented mass systematic campaign of rape and sexual assault engaged in by Israel against Palestinians. Through its rape coverage, Western media parrots Israeli lies, which are then parroted by Western politicians. This lie was based in large part on a New York Times piece called Screams Without Words: How Hamas Weaponized Sexual Violence on October 7th. It reported that a New York Times investigation, quote, uncovered new details showing a pattern of rape, mutilation, and extreme brutality against women in the attacks on Israel. But the article was so shoddy that the editors canceled the podcast episode they had planned to do on it when New York Times staff rebelled. The family of one of the subjects of the piece didn't just push back on the journalist's claims that their relative had been raped, but said he had misrepresented himself. Every single witness who came forward has been discredited. On CNN, Dana Bash spent an entire segment asking Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal to condemn Hamas's rape of Israeli women. I'm going to actually show a clip of this because I think it perfectly captures how Western media uses atrocity propaganda to justify actual propagandas. Please play the video.
15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, 3/4 of whom are women and children.
And it's horrible, but you don't see Israeli soldiers raping
well, Dana, I think
women.
Okay, so just to reiterate what happened there, Pramila Jayapal, after having been asked to condemn Hamas rape several times during an interview with Dana Bash, did condemn Hamas's alleged rape. Of course, the word alleged was not used. But then Pramila Jayapal had the gall to encourage Dana Bash to show some bias and talk about the outrages committed against Palestinians and mentioned the death of 15,000 civilians. And Dana Bash's response was, and it's horrible, but you don't see Israeli soldiers raping Palestinian women. And this is a quintessential example of how atrocity propaganda is being used to launder and justify actual atrocities. It brings up the rape to downplay Israel's actions. It implies that Israelis are enlightened and evolved humans who do not and would not engage in sexual violence. Palestinians, however, are savage rapists, or, as Israel's then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant put it on October 9, 2023, we are fighting human animals and we act accordingly. The Israeli government, Israeli media, Western corporate media, and Western politicians engage in a mutually reinforcing feedback loop of propaganda. For example, Hillary Clinton, Facebook CEO Sheryl Sandberg, and a group of scholars joined together to speak about the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war, invoking Hamas as an example. Sheryl Sandberg made a documentary on this. During the vice presidential debate, Kamala Harris used the rape hoax, much like Bashed, to justify Israel's actions, saying, on October 7th, women were horribly raped, and so absolutely, I said then and I say now, Israel has a right to defend itself. And while this mass campaign of rape was concocted to rally hate, media and political elites ignored the actual rape perpetuated by Israelis against Palestinians. And I also want to acknowledge Sahar Francis for her excellent presentation yesterday, where she actually relayed the testimony of raped and sexually abused and tortured Palestinians, and this testimony is utterly absent from Western media's coverage. I will focus on one instance of sexual violence in which Israeli soldiers literally, and excuse my language here, but gang raped a Palestinian prisoner on video at the notorious Sde Taiman detention facility in the Negev desert. And unlike the alleged Hamas rapes, this was also documented. The systematic sexual abuse of Palestinians by Israelis has been documented by human rights organizations and, as we'll see, Israeli society and video. So in this video, we see a prisoner dragged behind the soldier's shields. But it was so obvious that he was sexually assaulted that the Israeli media reported it as such. He was then hospitalized, by the way, and unable to walk. When Israeli police detained some of the alleged rapists, Israelis rioted, not against the rape or the rapist, but against the arrest of the rapists in protests that have been dubbed right to rape protests. These protests were attended by members of the government. Nobody denied it. A member of the Knesset even said that, quote, inserting sticks into people's rectums was, quote unquote, legitimate. There's video of a rabbi blessing a rapist, and one of the rapists became a star and celebrity. And yet neither Kamala Harris nor Dana Bash mentioned this. The New York Times did cover this incident very briefly in an article called Israeli Military Prosecutor Charges 5 Reservists with Abusive Detainees. And you can obviously contrast that language with the extremely inflammatory language used in the headline about the screams without words, the Hamas rape. Okay, the article read, at one point, one of the soldiers stabbed him with a sharp object, causing a tear in his rectal wall. This did not appear until the 7th paragraph, and there was no use of the word rape or sexual violence. So the US media and Western media and US political elites are still talking about the rape that didn't happen, yet have been silent on a campaign of sexual violence that has been recorded. In fact, we have a UNN report that says that rape is being used as a method of war by Israel. We have also documentation by B'Tselem and countless Palestinian human rights organizations. B'Tselem wrote that prisoners are subject to repeated use of sexual violence by soldiers or prison guards. Western corporate media has abandoned journalistic principles and practice to win public support for the Gaza genocide. Human rights lawyer Craig McIver directs us to the historical precedents for holding Western media responsible for their role. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights guarantees, quote, the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media, regardless of frontiers. But the same document warns, nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein. The United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Crime of Genocide doesn't merely make genocide punishable, but also public incitement to commit genocide and complicity in genocide. Even before the founding of the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and crime of genocide, the Nuremberg trial found newspaper publisher Julius Streicher guilty of incitement to genocide. One of the things, by the way, his newspaper pushed was the idea that Jewish men were violating German women's bodies, interestingly enough. Decades later, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda convicted 3 media figures of incitement to genocide. As scurrilous as the conduct of the Western corporate press has been over the last few years, we have had a shining example of what journalism can look like in the work and voices of Palestinian journalists, over 200 of whom have been killed for doing their work in these last 2 years. The targeted murdering of Palestinian colleagues makes Western corporate journalists complicit in these crimes all the worse. So I urge the jury to hold the media accountable for their complicity in genocide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Halper. And now I'm inviting Ms. Maura Finkelstein to speak about university complicity.
Thank you for having me here. My name is Maura Finkelstein, and until May 2024, I was a tenured professor of anthropology at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I'm here in my capacity as an expert in university complicity and genocide, and in the 10 minutes I have, I will show how colleges and universities in the United States have actively supported Israel's US-backed genocide in Gaza through 3 features of university complicity. First, university investments. Second, university partnerships, and third, university silencing of dissent. Before I begin, I note that my testimony is drawn from the US context, which is probably the worst context, where my expertise lies. However, I would argue that across the world, every institution that hasn't expressly divested from Israel clearly condemned the genocide and scholasticide and unequivocally supported students, faculty, and staff who are supporting Palestinian liberation is complicit in this genocide. The jury should also be aware that this work of silencing speech and action in support of Palestinian liberation and in opposition to this genocide is part of a much larger and longer assault on our campuses because they offer a space of solidarity, radical possibility, organizing, and community care despite and because of the university's evolution towards corporate and authoritarian structures. It's against this backdrop that we've watched the last 2 years of violent repression unfold. Feature 1, university investments. Most colleges and universities are not transparent about their economic partnerships. So students use the slogan, disclose, divest, to demand that administrators, boards of trustees, and boards of regents first disclose their investments and then unload these investments in companies that are directly aiding in the dispossession, ethnic cleansing, and genocide in Gaza. Acknowledging the general refusal of university administrators to disclose, a vast majority of American colleges and universities, on one hand, directly support genocide through investments in Israel and weapons manufacturers, and, on the other, indirectly support genocide through investments in companies as revealed in Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese's report, From Economy of Occupation to Economy of Genocide. So this includes Google and Amazon, which provide technological services for Israel's military, Airbnb, which allows for rental listings in illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and Caterpillar, whose equipment Israel's military uses to destroy homes and crush Palestinians and their allies. We must also take into account philanthropic support. US universities depend on corporate funding and billionaire donors, which result in stakeholders who have the power to determine the educational policy and ideological brand of these institutions, as well as where these institutions invest their funds. And we've seen that many of these are explicitly Zionist. Feature 2, university partnerships. colleges and universities in the US consistently partner with those in Israel to build and cement ties through study abroad and student exchange programs. As Maya Wynn's research has revealed, these are all institutions that serve the State of Israel's project of apartheid, occupation, and settler colonial genocide. Additionally, organizations like Hillel International not only host and organize such exchanges, they also facilitate birthright trips and Hasbara fellowships for students, and most egregiously, 65 colleges and universities across the US take part in the Israel Fellows program, which brings former Israeli soldiers to campus to forge deeper ties between American students and Israel. These fellows also aid in the harassment, surveillance, and intimidation of Palestinian and anti-Zionist students, faculty, and staff. Of further concern are research collaborations. As just one example, since World War II and solidifying and expanding during the Cold War, US universities have collaborated with the military and aerospace sectors, or what we call the military-industrial academic complex, including what the Department of Defense calls University-Affiliated Research Centers, or UARCs, a program developed in 1996 to develop essential engineering and technological capabilities. There are 15 UARC schools in the US, and one of them, the University of Southern California, was also recently revealed to provide human cadavers to the US and Israeli military for trauma surgery training for Israeli soldiers. Feature 3, University Silencing Dissent. In order to protect their investments and partnerships in Israel and its genocide, colleges and universities have been actively and violently silencing dissent and foreclosing spaces of solidarity. An example of this is university overreach. Columbia University has infamously led the way in normalizing repression and silencing dissent on college and university campuses. We've seen this with President Manoush Shafiq's congressional hearing in spring 2024, where she revealed that she dismissed or removed 5 faculty members from the classroom and suspended 15 students and 2 student groups, Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voices for Peace, from campus. She then incorrectly categorized both From the River to the Sea and globalized the Intifada as hate speech. Across the US, college and university administrators following Columbia are now partnering with Zionist organizations like Hillel International, the Anti-Defamation League, and AIPAC to run campus anti-Semitism trainings, which, drawing on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IRA, definition of anti-Semitism, categorizes advocating for Palestinian liberation and condemning Israel's genocide in Gaza as hate speech. Another example is how university administrations are silencing and endangering students. The Gaza Solidarity encampments are the most explicit demonstration. As part of the steady neoliberal shift over the past 40 years, college and university administrators across the US have worked hand in glove with the police to dismantle student encampments and brutalize and incarcerate students and some faculty and staff who have been part of the encampment movements. Some of the worst violences occurred at, once again, Columbia University, with the administrative sanctioned police attacks on Hind Hall, and UCLA, where administrators and police stood back as Zionist and white supremacist mobs brutalized students in the middle of the night. Across the US, every single one of these violent acts of repression occurred under the direction and oversight of college and university leadership. This silencing of dissent by college and university administrators has led to collaborations with ICE and the Trump administration, and these violences have only escalated. As of May 2025, the Middle East Studies Association's Academic Freedom Initiative has tracked 1,708 cases involving visa relocations and terminations of immigration records, entry denials, deportations, and detentions of university students, faculty, and staff. While the most well-known case is that of Mahmoud Khalil, I want to draw attention to 2 political prisoners, Leka Kordia and Casey Gunan, who are still in detention because of their anti-genocide activism and support for Palestinian liberation. Free Leka, free Casey, free all political prisoners. Lastly, I would like to draw attention to the jury's attention to how administrators are suspending and terminating faculty and staff. Over the past 2 years, the Department of Education has released over 100 schools, a list of over 100 schools under investigation by the Office of Civil Rights for potential violations of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Numerous university administrators, famously among them Harvard University, Columbia University, and my former employer, Muhlenberg College, have responded to and exacerbated the situation by conflating political criticism of Israel and Zionism with anti-Semitism and using this to suspend and fire faculty and staff. Once again, drawing on the Middle East Studies Association's research, the Academic Freedom Initiative has created a database that tracks all adverse employment outcomes for university employees who have advocated for Palestine since October 2023. Thus far, and this is just based on people who are willing to disclose their information, they've recorded 61 cases of retaliation, including suspension, termination, forced resignation, rescinded offers, and removal from service positions across 37 colleges and universities. I am one of those faculty members. The number of faculty and staff who are targets continues to grow. These ongoing repressive measures by college and university administrators have created a chilling effect across higher education, as many academics are now choosing to self-censor, cancel classes, refrain from publishing and posting on social media, and omit materials about Palestine from their classes in order to avoid investigation. So in conclusion, I've thus far talked about how institutions of higher education across the United States have directly defended and justified Israel's genocide in Gaza. More insidiously, within academic spaces, many university workers have elided the real stakes of settler colonial genocide, ethnic cleansing, and land dispossession by fabricating, circulating, and normalizing both sides' rhetoric on our campuses. These institutions cannot bring back the dead, nor can they undo the damage of Israel's destruction. But at a minimum, and echoing Rania Muhareb's call on Thursday, we must demand that these institutions completely divest from weapons manufacturers, all militaries, and companies aiding and abetting genocide, as well as the Israeli state. Additionally, U.S. institutions of higher education must dissolve partnerships and exchanges with Israeli institutions and ban Zionist watchdog organizations like Hillel International and the ADL from spaces of influence on campuses. But this is not enough. Every institution with financial ties to the Israeli state should pledge that money number and more to Gaza as Palestinians rebuild the world we in the West have been so active in destroying. While these reparations are not enough, they are at least a start. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maura Finkelstein. And we will proceed with the next topic. That will be a government complicity. And we will be watching a video from a witness, Lily Greenberg.
May 2024, I served as a special advisor to the Chief of Staff at the U.S. Department of the Interior. I was a political appointee in the Biden administration. My name is Lily Greenberg Call. I'm honored to be here with you all today virtually. I wish I could be there in person. Thank you for allowing me to speak today, members of the tribunal, distinguished observers, and fellow witnesses. Again, it's an honor to be here with you and to be a part of this important process. My name is Lily Greenberg Call. Until May 2024, I served as a special advisor to the Chief of Staff at the U.S. Department of the Interior. I was a political appointee in the Biden administration. I'm here to testify to the complicity of the United States government in what the world now recognizes as the genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. I speak in my personal capacity as a Jewish American, as a former government official, and as a human being who decided that I could no longer be a part of an administration that was enabling mass death. I joined the Biden administration in January 2023 after working on the campaigns. I am a part of a generation of young public servants who believed that we were restoring moral leadership after the first Trump administration. And my work at the Department of Interior focused on climate, environmental policy, and protecting our natural resources. Although I was not in a national security agency, I witnessed through internal communications, appointee briefings, interagency coordination, and my interactions with senior White House officials how the administration responded to events following October 7th, 2023. And I also witnessed the internal environment of fear, censorship, and moral paralysis that defined the administration's position towards Israel's assault on Gaza. My testimony draws from those experiences, from communications among colleagues, and from the public record that is now overwhelmingly demonstrates U.S. knowledge of and participation in Israel's genocidal campaign. After the attack on October 7, 2023, which killed 1,200 Israelis and took hostages, there was widespread grief throughout the administration. And I will add that that attack was something that hit me personally and my community very hard. I grew up in a very close and tight-knit Jewish community with friends and family in the United States and in Israel, and many people I know lost family members and loved ones on October 7th. The grief that I felt and that everyone felt after that was legitimate and deeply felt. And that grief was recognized very clearly by my colleagues in the administration. But almost immediately, it felt like grief was replaced with a directive for total political alignment with the Israeli government, regardless of its actions. There was an almost immediate cloud that kind of came over everyone working in government. Colleagues who had been in service much longer than me compared it to post 9/11, and some even to the Vietnam era, where it felt like they could not express any disagreement with U.S. policy. Especially as an appointee, I served at the pleasure of the president. So those of us who were political appointees, I think, felt even more pressure to echo the president's public statements that emphasize Israel's right to defend itself, omit any knowledge or acknowledgement of international law or civilian protection. And when internal questions arose about proportionality, aid access, or the scope of military support, they were met with silence or reprimand. To me, this was the beginning, at least in the post-October 7th landscape, of the United States' active complicity in the genocide, the deliberate decision to subordinate moral, legal, and humanitarian obligations in favor of political loyalty. Of course, I acknowledge and recognize that U.S. complicity in the genocide of the Palestinian people has been happening for many, many years. And I often echoed this statement to senior White House officials. When I was asked about my opinions on what was happening, I spoke as a Jewish American who was deeply impacted by October 7th, and often told people that I did not feel unsafe as a Jew because of Hamas's attack, and I did not feel unsafe because of anything that the Palestinian people or any rhetoric I was experiencing from Arab or Muslim colleagues in the administration or fellow Americans. What made me feel unsafe was the United States support and enabling of Israel's system of apartheid and inequality and occupation that created the conditions for October 7th to happen. So it felt like by mid-October, I was hearing from other colleagues about intelligence and humanitarian briefings from across agencies that documented the scale of the destruction in Gaza, that thousands of civilians were killed in weeks, that entire neighborhoods were bombed, that warnings from aid organizations of imminent collapse of medical and food systems were going ignored. And these reports circulated internally, and they circulated informally in signal group chats and among conversation. I know senior officials were aware of them, and I and others received updates confirming that the U.S. government knew in real time that the continued arms transfers and diplomatic cover were facilitating war crimes. By November, thousands of U.S. officials across multiple agencies had signed internal dissent cables or open letters calling for a ceasefire, and none of these warnings changed policy. The president continued to approve weapons shipments. The administration vetoed multiple UN Security Council resolutions calling for a ceasefire, And the justification, often repeated internally, was that halting support would undermine U.S. credibility and embolden our adversaries. In truth, there was acknowledgement among government officials that this was not a policy problem. This was a political problem. This was about maintaining political control and avoiding confrontation with the pro-Israel lobby here in America. A pro-Israel lobby that, I might add, has become increasingly co-opted by Christian nationalists and Christian Zionists who have no interest in the safety of American Jews or Israeli Jews or any minority community, and have enabled and propped up the Trump administration, the MAGA regime, and the Christian nationalist, alt-right, authoritarian leadership that we are seeing currently. So from my understanding, and again, I was not part of any agency that was responsible for these acts of complicity, but I believe that the US government's complicity in the Gaza genocide took several concrete forms: material support, bombs, missiles, artillery shells, diplomatic protection, the US using its veto power at the United Nations to block international ceasefire efforts and investigations and shield Israel from accountability under international law, rhetorical cover. Senior officials consistently repeated Israel's false narratives, calling hospitals terrorist command centers or claiming that there were no credible alternative to military operations, which we knew was false, and especially displayed by the November 2023 deal that brought back many, many more hostages than any military operation. And then, of course, censorship and retaliation. So within the administration, the culture of silence meant that employees who spoke out faced professional isolation and threats to their careers, something that I experienced personally before I even resigned publicly. So this culture of fear ensured a continued silence and bureaucratic obedience. Inside my department, many people spoke about Gaza. It was not spoken about publicly, but privately, this dominated conversations among staff. I knew people, both inside my department and across government, were grieving and horrified and desperate for guidance. Sometimes within my agency, we were told that foreign policy is not our lane, to which I was very frustrated because this administration, the Biden administration, had made a concrete effort to hire appointees who were younger and more diverse than ever before. And I know that many of my Muslim and Arab colleagues expressed their frustration to senior officials, especially when their families were telling them that they should resign, that the administration was complicit in genocide and committing war crimes. And this sentiment was often expressed to senior White House leadership of, why did you hire us if you're not interested in what we actually have to bring to the table and what our communities have to say? I observed colleagues from across the administration express a quiet despair. They knew that what Israel was doing in Gaza was morally indefensible. They knew that it was terrible not just for Palestinians, but for Israelis as well, and also for Americans to be associated with and known as the enablers of these crimes. Senior officials in defense and military agencies knew that the US supplied weapons were being used in civilian areas and indiscriminate bombings of civilian areas. And so in December, when the International Court of Justice began considering South Africa's genocide case against Israel, the internal reaction in the administration was one of contempt, not reflection. It was mocked as political theater, and no one really questioned at a high level, I believe, what it meant for our own legal exposure. Ultimately, by early 2024, it became impossible for me to reconcile my service with my conscience. And I felt that I was doing everything I could from inside, whether that was organizing people across government to participate in vigils, to sign on to anonymous letters that got thousands of signatories, to have one-on-one conversations with their bosses, to see what levers of power we could pull internally. And ultimately, it felt like I had done everything I could. And there was no change that was being made. So I decided to resign in May of 2024, stating publicly that I could no longer represent a president that enabled the killing, starvation, and displacement of millions of Palestinians. I was the first Jewish political appointee, and unfortunately the only, to resign publicly over the genocide. I know that there were many others, Jewish appointees, who left the administration in large part because of Gaza, but did not do so publicly. I resigned also very close to the holiday of Passover, which is a holiday that is about liberation from oppression. And I remember in 2024, when I was celebrating Passover, knowing deep in my heart that the lesson to take from that holiday was to speak truth to power, to be like Moses in Pharaoh's kingdom, even when it means going against your community or the people who raised you, or the power that you've benefited from. My resignation was not in opposition to my Jewishness, right? It was because of it. Everything I've ever learned about what it means to be Jewish is that human life is of infinite value, and that to remain silent in the face of injustice is to participate in it. And I want to underscore that my resignation was not a heroic act. It was an act of moral survival. It was an acknowledgement of an understanding with myself that this was the biggest and most important thing I could do in the moment to potentially save lives. And that if I did not do that, I would be failing myself spiritually, morally, and I would not be the person that I want to be in this world. Remaining in that position would have meant accepting the destruction of an entire people as collateral damage, and in particular, the destruction of an entire people in the name of my people's supposed safety, with a president who was repeating that rhetoric consistently. By the end of 2024, the official record was that over 40,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, and I am certain, and we know, that the real number is much, much more. Independent investigations have confirmed that Israel deliberately targeted civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools, aid convoys. Famine has spread as Israel blocked fuel and food. Tent camps in Rafah were bombed, and all of this was done with U.S. weapons funded by U.S. taxpayers and defended by U.S. diplomats. The administration could not claim ignorance. Every major humanitarian organization warned of the unfolding genocide. And yet the president continued to say Israel was acting within the bounds of international law, while also, regardless of international law, Israel was explicitly breaking the U.S.'s own laws, the Leahy laws, about military aid. This was not mere negligence, it was a conscious political choice. And I know why this happens, in part because of my own experience with the Israel lobby in the United States. Decades of unconditional military aid, political lobbying, and the normalization of Palestinian dehumanization in our politics. Lobbying groups like AIPAC and CUFI, Christians United for Israel, exert enormous influence on U.S. policy, shaping foreign aid and the boundaries of public speech, and elected officials often fear being labeled anti-Semitic if they even question Israeli actions or bring up conditioning aid, while Palestinians and their allies are criminalized for demanding freedom. This structural corruption makes accountability nearly impossible. What I think needs to happen, one of the many things that I think needs to happen, are more than acknowledgement. There needs to be an immediate suspension of all U.S. military aid and arms transfers to Israel, full cooperation with internal investigations into genocide and war crimes, reparations, humanitarian reconstructions for Gaza, protections for whistleblowers and dissenters, and structural reforms to end the influence of militarized and foreign lobbying on American policy. And only through such measures can the U.S. begin to atone for its role in this atrocity and prevent future ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. That was Lily Grimberg, a witness. And now we'll talk about corporate weapons complicity. We will have an online session, and with us is Shad Humuri. Mr. Humuri, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Humuri. Please, the time is yours.
Thank you. Dear esteemed members of the jury, I apologize for not being able to be here in person. I will start by noting that the genocide in Gaza is a context of extremity that has shed power relations bare. It exemplifies the centrality of the interest of capital to the international order. The rules of the free market are the unspoken religion of the status quo that we live in. The accumulation of wealth is only sustainable with the expansion of warfare. The productive capacity of economically advanced states has been deteriorating, and the only means of sustaining dominance is through militarization. Israel is a militarized settler colony. Its economy is built around the sustenance of warfare in the service of the globalized market. It's an open market for militarization and a leading producer of weapons and technologies. Israeli investors are leading actors in some of the bloodiest supply chains that start in the global south, including blood diamonds, cobalt, copper, and gold in the DRC, Central African Republic, Zimbabwe, and Sudan. Israeli military experts have trained US-backed authoritarian militias and regimes across the world in South Sudan, Nicaragua, Colombia, Nigeria, and Kenya. The State of Israel is openly funded by the United States of America, which manipulates the dollar and maintains economic supremacy through coercive means, facilitated by its economic superiority. Those who fund the State of Israel, as we've heard from the other testimonies, predominantly believe in racial supremacy and endorse an apocalyptic vision of the future. In this context, the sustenance of the genocide was an effect of the current dynamics of the globalized market economy. In this short intervention, I seek to bring to your attention some of the relations in the global value chains sustaining the genocide in the weapons, technology, energy, logistics, finance, media, and humanitarian and stabilization industries. First and foremost, and the biggest industry here has been the weapons industry. In the past decade, the weapons industry has been highly privatized, the trade of weapons deregulated, and war commodified. During the genocide in Gaza, Israel used over hundreds of thousands of tons of explosives, flattening the whole city to the ground. Israel tested new weapons in Gaza, highly explosive weapons and outdated weapons. Residents reported evaporating chemicals, bone-cutting shrapnel, excessive use of suicide drones, among so many other bloody observations that we've heard so far in this tribunal. Israel used the most advanced technology available to mankind in order to destroy on purpose one of the most densely populated areas on Earth. It collected intelligence with the support of the leading states in this field, including the United Kingdom, from where I speak to you now. In this regard, the states of the United States of America, the United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, France, Australia, India, Romania, and the Netherlands, among others, openly traded weapons with Israel in violation of their obligations under international law. The steady flow of weapons import is paralleled with the flow of export. Many states, such as the UAE and Saudi Arabia, heavily purchase weapons from Israel, financing its military industry and facilitating its war effort. The genocide offered an apt marketing and testing opportunity for the Israeli military corporation, as we saw in multiple affairs this year. For example, the system has benefited from increased exports and extensively expanded its marketing. The exporting corporations include Boeing, General Dynamics, Leonardo, Lockheed Martin, RTX, formerly Raytheon, BAE Systems, Rheinmetall, and Rolls-Royce, among many others. The operations of such corporations are financed by giant banks like Barclays, Lloyds, Santander, Deutsche Bank, and HSBC, among many others. Many of the leading universities of the world, as we heard, and pension funds hold considerable investments in these corporations. Aside from the rapid demand on rockets, bombs, and warplanes, Israel has also purchased guns and rifles designated for settlers and attack dogs from Wind Canine in the Netherlands to brutalize prisoners of war, among many other uses. Aerial bombardment is a symbol of an unequal battleground. Technologically advanced states can deploy weapons from the sky with minimal risk to their own personnel. A proportion of the warplanes dropping bombs on Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and Yemen are supplied through the NATO F-35 program. Activists have sought to challenge the role of the UK and the Netherlands in the supply of warplane components to Israel, but these efforts were completely met with political reluctance, where NATO obligations were prioritized over international legal obligations. Logistics services were provided by corporations all across the world. Most recently, evidence demonstrates extensive services provided by the Indian corporation Tata. The jet fuel used to power these warplanes is transported via a long supply chain where the American corporation Valerio plays a significant role. The supply chain of crude oil that can be refined for this purpose spans across the US, Azerbaijan, Angola, Nigeria, and Brazil. Meanwhile, in the technology industry, technologies which facilitate the collection and storage of data are powerful tools of control. Israel is a leading actor in the global surveillance and cybersecurity industry. It is notorious for its use of physical surveillance technologies and spyware to further entrench its control over the Palestinian people. Such technologies are further monetized in the global market, facilitating control by other repressive regimes. And as it obsessively collected endless amounts of data about the Palestinians, Israel needed cloud storage. In 2021, Israel signed a deal with Amazon and Google in what's known as Project Nimbus to provide cloud storage space. Similarly, Microsoft provides software services to Israel as well as cloud storage to facilitate its management of the Palestinian population. Israel's assertion of control through the use of technology gained a new dimension during the ongoing genocide with the use of artificial intelligence, notably used for the creation of kill lists with the well-known program Lavender. The US-based corporation Palantir has heavily profited from the supply of AI services to the US, leveraging thereby its marketing opportunity to attract clients such as the NHS in the UK. While discussion regarding the use of AI in warfare has been ongoing for years, this is one of the first cases where it's been used on such a mass scale. It's estimated that Lavender guided the murder of tens of thousands of Palestinians. Meanwhile, in the energy industry, energy has a very different role in the supply chain, and it is in some part incentivizing the genocide and facilitating its sustenance. States have the duty to undertake measures within their capacity to end the genocide, as clearly established thus far. However, states like Turkey maintain the supply of energy through the BTC pipeline in collaboration with SOCAR and BP, among others. Meanwhile, when we look at the incentivization of genocide, Gaza is the last Palestinian city by the sea. As you all very much well know, so many Palestinians have never even seen the sea, and only those who live in Gaza are the last ones who are capable of seeing the last part of our heritage across the Mediterranean Sea. Thereby, it poses a threat and a limitation to Israel's energy aspirations, as well as its trade aspirations. Israel's gas fields are not safe in a war zone. At the start of the genocide, Israel assured its prospective investors, including BP and ENI, that they are in safe hands. Similarly, strong evidence has been presented against Chevron for its unlawful exploitation of Palestinian resources. Of course, the seizure of Gaza would mean opening the potential of exploiting its untapped gas fields, which exist off its shores. On the logistics industry's level, energy and weapons are transferred to Israel with the help of shipping companies like Maersk and Zim. Transit lines offer apt opportunity for disruption of the supply chain. However, many states, and most states, particularly around the Mediterranean, openly facilitated the transfer of weapons and technology to Israel, with very limited instances of stopping that, despite clear positions by activists as well as international lawyers. The genocide created great opportunities, unparalleled, for the cargo and transit businesses in neighboring countries. Notably, the corporation Hala in Egypt reaped millions of dollars through fees imposed on Gazans seeking refuge. Meanwhile, transit corporations in Jordan, like Petra, Karim, and Salam, profited from business opportunities created by this genocide. When it comes to the finance industry, Israel's war economy is facilitated by the giant banks of the world. Notably, Citibank has played a major role in financing the Israeli war economy and arms corporations feeding into it. Meanwhile, and most egregiously, the Central Bank of Ireland facilitated transactions surrounding Israel bonds, openly marketed as tools to fund the Israeli war efforts. Ireland recently transferred the processing of these bonds to Luxembourg, which hasn't responded to letters and objections by international lawyers as to its complicity in a genocide through the facilitating of the prospectus for Israeli bonds. As noted previously, media as well has played an important role in facilitating and maintaining its genocide. And at the end of the day, these are corporations that themselves are complicit in the selling of the narrative that doesn't speak truth to profit. Last but not least, and most importantly at this juncture that we speak in, is the day after. As we speak, the US is planning to openly occupy Gaza, using the shield of business and investment by controlling the reconstruction of Gaza. It conducted a trial run with the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a corporation that is responsible for the killing of over 2,600 Palestinians. The situation demonstrates that accountability for Palestinians must start with the confrontation of local and global economic reality, and to refuse the weaponization of the public-private divide and the normalization of coercion by the threat of genocide as means of enforcing alien domination and subjugation on the Palestinian people. We are indeed at the most dangerous juncture where business and investment will take hold in a manner of an indirect occupation. And this, of course, has been and is supported by the precedents of the Iraq War and the likes. And indeed, it seems that the US has recycled its plan for economic domination in Iraq and even forgot some of the details by hiring Tony Blair, again recycling him for this purpose. Thank you very much for taking the time to look at this very short and brief illustration of how this war economy has looked like. Indeed, this can be a subject of discussion for hours, and indeed it is quite important to note that the liberation of Palestine also requires a rethinking of the international legal system, a move towards a people's international law that enshrines the new international economic order and ways forward towards economic justice, where in a place where such extensive supply chains of greed and atrocity will not be tolerated. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hammouri. And the next topic is cloud and artificial intelligence and bombs and bullets of the 21st century. Ms. Ibtihal Abu Saad will be speaking. Ms. Abu Saad, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
The time is yours, please.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Ibtihal Abu Saad, and I am a technologist and a labor organizer who has witnessed how global tech infrastructures have become, or honestly have been, complicit in genocide and apartheid from inside the industry. I was a software engineer at Microsoft AI for 4 years who was then fired for exposing and denouncing their complicity in the current genocide in Gaza at the hands of Israel. So in the 15 minutes that I have, I will specifically address first just how the tech industry as a whole underwrites and sustains the machinery of Israel's genocide and apartheid. And then I will briefly delve into the key mechanisms and explanations of this complicity, which are cloud infrastructure services, AI surveillance, and propaganda. And then lastly, I will affirm why the jury must see tech not as some neutral actor, but as a central, more than complicit, as a central actor in the material architecture of this genocide, and also what accountability must look like. So first, in terms of laying out the tech industry's role in this genocide, the jury should be mindful that today what has been enabling this genocide is not only the bombs and the sort of physical weapons, but also tech infrastructure, which represents this more invisible backbone that allows Israel to watch and to predict and to kill at scale. And right now, the genocide in Gaza is the most digitized and tech-reliant campaign of mass violence and ethnic cleansing in modern history. Because every airstrike by Israel and every displacement order in Gaza and every assassination of a journalist or a doctor, they all get guided by data to some extent. And so we have location tracking, we have biometric profiling, we have machine learning models that have all enabled Israel, and this is in the words of actual Israeli soldiers, they've enabled them to reach the scale of the genocide that we've seen today, and they've been essential in identifying targets and ranking civilians as targets. And so behind these systems are some of the largest tech corporations in the world. So whether they're cloud providers, whether they're surveillance firms, whether they provide networking and semiconductors, and even data analytics companies. So all these different companies across the world have been supplying the computational capacity and the tools and the engineering talent and support engineers that make this algorithmic genocide possible. And I want to affirm to the jury that none of these complicity facts are speculative, because we have investigations from several outlets like The Guardian, Al Jazeera, Plus 972 magazine, and even from independent technologists who have all documented the integration of commercial AI tools and cloud services into Israel's military apparatus. And this has been possible through billion-dollar contracts like Project Nimbus with Google and Amazon, and through corporate partnerships such as the one with Microsoft and OpenAI that provide AI infrastructure to the Israeli Defense Forces. And most recently, in her recent report, Francesca Albanese also built on this evidence and these investigations to describe how some of these private technology companies form part of what she calls an economy of genocide. And this report honestly just confirms what many technologists and what many Palestinian rights advocates have been warning us about for years from before the genocide, which is that tech has militarized itself and prioritized profit over people in maintaining the system of apartheid in Palestine. And so now we will just delve into a quick explanation of how these tech contracts do accelerate and power Israel's genocide in Gaza. So when we talk about the cloud infrastructure, the cloud is essentially the main piece here and the oxygen of modern genocide mechanisms, because it provides the servers and the data storage that allow for all the surveillance and all of the targeting by Israel. And so when these companies sell cloud capacity to like a military like the IDF, they're not just hosting its data, they're providing the compute power for genocide, because it is impossible for human soldiers to process such massive troves of data to be able to annihilate entire families and neighborhoods within seconds. And in Gaza, this infrastructure underpins Israel's automated targeting systems, such as Lavender, such as Where's Daddy, which was mentioned in the talk right before, which rely on machine learning models to essentially decide who lives and who dies, and to maximize human deaths without any necessary human supervision. And so these systems that are built on artificial intelligence, they've added nearly 40,000 Gazans to kill lists, again with no or minimal human oversight, and only within the span of the first year of this genocide, nearly 40,000. And so again, this automation would quite literally not be possible without these cloud storage capacity that are provided by Western tech giants. And so I ask that the jury recognize that these infrastructure, which is often marketed as neutral innovation, is now directly and willingly implicated in mass targeting and mass deaths. And the second mechanism here is surveillance. And so the Israeli state has long treated Palestinian populations as a testing ground for many control technologies, from facial recognition to drones to automated checkpoints. And so what we have now is companies like Palantir that supply software to militaries and to police departments around the world are included in Israel in providing these abilities for data analysis and target selection. We have Intel and NVIDIA, which provide the processors that power all these AI systems, like the hardware. We have Cisco, we have Elbit Systems, many others that build the networking and sensor technologies that feed into these systems. And as mentioned before, Microsoft and OpenAI provide some AI models, but the most dangerous ones right now are speech-to-text models that allow Israel to spy on Palestinians' phone calls and synthesize them to generate target lists and maximize civilian damage. And so all these AI tools that are being refined on Palestinians against their will, they later get marketed globally as battle tested, and they get exported to regimes and police forces around the world and essentially extend the cycle of oppression. And the third and final mechanism of tech complicity is propaganda, which is the digital warfare of narrative, of censorship of Palestinian voices, and of misinformation. And so we've been seeing this, that as Gaza burns, algorithms on these social media platforms continue to bury the truth of its burning. And so we have companies like Meta, Google, TikTok, and X, which have repeatedly been censoring Gazan voices and Palestinian voices under the guise of safety and under the guise of community standards. And they've removed accounts of journalists, of aid workers, of survivors at the height of the genocide. And meanwhile, these same platforms have amplified Israeli military propaganda, which is Hasbara, and spread and verified claims and AI-generated fabrications that are being used to justify mass killing and manufacture consent for genocide. And I would like to emphasize that this is not accidental. It's from direct, intentional algorithmic bias, because Western political pressure and long-standing partnerships between these tech firms and state agencies and their counterterrorism frameworks are at play here as well. And even like Meta's oversight board, like itself, found that its systems disproportionately suppress content that is in Arabic, for example, while allowing anti-Palestinian hate to circulate a lot more freely. And so we are seeing a digital mirror of the same apartheid that is on the ground in Palestine for nearly 8 decades now. And where one people's humanity and story is amplified while the other is erased with algorithms. And so I would like to plead for the jury to recognize that these tech companies' role in spreading Israeli propaganda is not just peripheral, and that it is also, despite not being physical, it is also an active weapon that sustains the moral immunity of those who profit from genocide, and that suppresses the voices of truth and reporting in Gaza. And in terms of efforts that have been done to resist this complicity, the jury should also be aware that this system persists not because people inside the tech are unaware, but because people that speak out are silenced, like myself and 10 other Microsoft employees in just this year who have been fired for just denouncing its complicity in genocide and apartheid. So workers across many tech companies have tried to expose and oppose these ties and face the same retaliation and censorship. And publicly, these companies, they present our firings as policy enforcements, but in reality, these are just warnings that dissent against Zionism and against complicity in genocide will cost you your career in tech. And so this internal repression, in a way, mirrors the external repression that we mentioned, because the industry enforces silence from within so that it can sustain that propaganda-led violence from outside. And so I ask the jury to recognize that genocide today again, is not only physical, but it is also digital. And so therefore, accountability must also be digital. So I asked that the jury should recommend, first of all, corporate disengagement from all Israeli military, Israeli surveillance, and government contracts. And secondly, public disclosure from all tech corporations of all their cloud, AI, and data services that are provided to any branch of the Israeli state. And then lastly, that we demand legal accountability for technology executives that have knowingly facilitated genocide and apartheid and their international doctrines of corporate complicity. And so to conclude, the jury should consider that every genocide begins with dehumanization, and the tech industry right now has automated this dehumanization process because the same systems that classify Palestinian civilians as targets or threats are built by technologists who go home believe that they're creating solutions, and this dissonance is the big moral disease of our time. And so if technology is to have any redemptive purpose, then it has to begin with truth, first and foremost. And the truth that I would like to convey today, again, in the words of Israeli soldiers, is that the scale of the genocide in Gaza is only possible because of tech weapons provided by these corporations. I thank the jury for your time and for just bearing witness with conscience today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Abu Saad. And now we will talk about Western civilizations and complicity. And we will also have one more online session. Mr. Hamid Dabashi will be speaking. Mr. Dabashi, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much. The time is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury of conscience, my name is Hamid Dabashi, and I am here in my capacity as a scholar of the history and theory of colonialism, as the sustained economic and political foregrounding of Western global domination. Today I will speak specifically about the roots of the current genocide in Palestine, in Gaza in particular, as the most recent phases of decades-long ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from their historic homeland. My testimony is based on my most recent book on this subject, After Savagery: Gaza, Genocide, and the Illusion of Western Civilization. It is impossible to exaggerate the terrorizing fact of the days and nights we are living. The political and military might of the entire Western world that thought and sold itself as the crowning achievement of our humanity has aided and abetted the mass murder of tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians. The proudest achievement of Western civilization, which is Western philosophy, as it calls itself, the history that it has colonized for itself, from Plato and Aristotle to Hegel and Heidegger, were all summed up in the miserable statement by the senior-most European philosopher, Jürgen Habermas, days after the most recent phase of the genocide of Palestinians started in Gaza, effectively giving a carte blanche to the Israeli settler colony to maim and murder Palestinians in their tens of thousands. We, the people of the world, especially in the global south, but extending to the non-white immigrant, exilic, and refugee communities in the north, are categorically outside the racist apartheid mind of the Western philosophical system. We are the wretched of this earth. That deeply and irretrievably tribal epistemic system that calls itself the West is exclusive to white Europeans as an ideological construct and does not allow others around the world, entry into that system, nor should we wish to enter that system. For that racist epistemic system must be morally, imaginatively, and politically dismantled. We in Asia, Africa, Latin America are a metaphysical menace to Western philosophy, and we are easily physically eliminated, as Palestinians have over the last 2 years, and indeed over the last century. The same way that we are metaphysically denied our existence. The history of European colonialism is the history of the physical elimination of what had already been metaphysically marred and marked as troublesome. Thus, the entire course of philosophy to the east of Plato and Aristotle is falsely alienated, orientalized, exoticized, and dismissed, while the Christian and Jewish disposition of the same philosophy westward is celebrated as philosophy. The savage European colonialism staged in Palestine does physically to the body of the colonized what Western philosophy had already done to their soul, defined it as an ontological impossibility. When the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, a Polish, Russian, and Lithuanian origin, says he is defending Western civilization, he is absolutely right. The garrison state over which Mr. Herzog presides is the last bastion of the genocidal history of Western civilization. A history that covers the genocide of Native Americans, transatlantic slavery, the German slaughter of the natives in Namibia, and the European Jewish Holocaust. What we face in Gaza is not only the fate of millions of human beings, whom, on behalf of its Western supporters, Israeli slaughter at will. We must also grapple with how to read this colossal injustice in a prose and politics that overcomes the monumental propaganda normalizing, justifying, excusing this genocidal urge. We need and we must categorically alter the discourse, beginning with the body and soul of Palestinians. Israeli genocide in Gaza is the terminal state of genocidal colonialism after a long and languid history around the globe. Is in his seminal essay, Settler Colonialism and Elimination of the Native, Patrick Wolf wrote, quote, "The question of genocide is never far from discussions of settler colonialism. Land is life, or at least land is necessary for life. Thus, contests for land can be indeed, often are, contests for life." End of quote. On behalf of its Western alliance, not allies, Israel has intentionally committed crimes against humanity to transform the Palestinian National Liberation Movement into a, quote, humanitarian crisis. The term humanitarian crisis has deliberately designated by US and European media outlets and politicians to avoid calling it for what it is, a genocide. The connective thread between Israel and the murderous mirage of the West are outlets like the New York Times and in the US and the BBC in UK, as representative of the entire landscape of corporate, liberal and reactionary, and state-sponsored media. Rather than telling the truth as it is, these media platforms sustain the status quo, the political and normative supremacy of the dysfunctional American empire and all its subsidiaries, particularly its biggest military investment in Israel as a useful settler colony. The result is not fake news. It is processed news, just like processed food, full of chemicals, additives, preservatives, and artificial coloring. For the longest time, the world has been hoodwinked and cast in the false shadow of European moral philosophy. I have adamantly opposed the idea that philosophers like Habermas were being hypocritical in disregarding Palestinians as human beings. In fact, he is perfectly consistent and logical within his imagination, just as Kant and Hegel and Heidegger before Habermas did not bat an eye, dismissing the entire swath of humanity. More than ever before, it is now becoming evident that Eurocentric philosophy has always been a tribal affair, faking universality by virtue of the brutish military might of the West, and not by virtue of any epistemic credibility or rational argument. Dismantling the false claims of Western philosophy is a necessary step towards allowing for the ruins of Gaza to emerge as the metaphysical foundation of a radically different way of thinking of the world philosophically. The racist legacy of European philosophy, reflected in Habermas's views, has no place in that emerging philosophical imaginary of the world at large, except as the extension of those dismounted statues of slaveholders in European or American city squares. Those statues ought to be taken down and placed in some distant museum of human miseries. This is how we must from now on read Western philosophy. I thank members of the jury of conscience for their patience.
Thank you, Mr. Zavashi. And now we will be watching witness eye testimonies. And the first one is about targeting of the journalists.
أخطر شيء علينا كصحفيين اليوم هو التهديد الإسرائيلي قتل كل الزملاء بلا استثناء. صح إنه في يعني إحنا قدمنا تقريبا 200 وأكثر من 220 شهيد من بداية الحرب الإسرائيلية حتى الآن من الزملاء، من المصورين والمراسلين والمحررين وفنيين الصوت اللي كانوا يطلعوا معنا في توثيق الصور بالصوت والصوره او توثيق عفوا المجازر. طبعا في شيء صراحه انه يعني مرعب. يعني انا لما انضميت لقناه الجزيره كان في تخوفات انه ممكن يصير في استهداف علينا، في يصير قصف، لانه التجارب بتقول انه كل المراسلين بلا استثناء تحت طائله الاستهداف الاسرائيلي. ولكن انا يعني هي ممكن نقول تحدي، وممكن نحكي كمان انه لا، المسؤوليه الاجتماعيه واخلاقيات المهنه والصور اللي بنشوفها والقتل اللي عمالنا بنشوفه في الشوارع وفي الاسواق وفي المدارس وفي المنازل بحتم علينا انه احنا لا نواصل نقل هاي الصوره، على الرغم انه فقط اللي شايلين نقل وتغطيه هاي الحرب من اكثر من 600 يوم هم صحفيين ولاد البلد. عدد كبير من الزملاء تلقوا على هواتفهم انه لو انت كملت حيتم قصف منزلك، حيتم قصف بيتك او المدرسه اللي انت فيها او المكان اللي انت فيه او عيلتك، او حيتم قصفك في الشارع او ما شابه ذلك. كثير زملاء كانوا يتلقوا بعد تغطيات ميدانيه انه اذا رجعت حيتم قصفك مره وثنتين وثلاثه. هاي الاتصالات او هذا التهديد والارهاب النفسي هو لا شك يعني بيأثر، ما انه هو احنا في النهايه بشر يعني، والجيش لما يخاطبك حاطب انت فعليا صعبه جدا عليك كامك كوالدك كعيلتك كاحبابك، انت فعليا بتكون في مرحله صعبه جدا، ولكن مع ذلك انت بتكمل رسالتك. يعني انا لما دفنت والدتي ولقيتها نايمه وقتلت واعدمت برصاص جنود وبقذيفه اسرائيليه عند مجمع الشفاء الطبي، واخذت استلمت الجثمان وكفنت الوالده ودفنتها، العصريات يعني هو انا كنت مغطي، كنت مكمل تغطيتي المحليه وقتها ومواصل الرساله.
لا سيما يعني إذا بدنا نحكي عن الصحفيين بدنا نحكي عن الصحفي هيثم عبد الواحد والصحفي نضال الوحيدة الذين أخذوا قسريا منذ يوم 7 أكتوبر بينما كانوا يقوموا بعملهم الصحفي داخل حدود قطاع غزة.
هيثم ونضال كأمثلة على صحفيين مخفيين قسريا منذ 7 أكتوبر، هل يرفض الاحتلال أصلا التعاون بشأنهم وشأن زملائهم؟
الاحتلال يرفض تقديم أي معلومة عن نضال وعن هيثم، يعني يرفض إعطاء أي معلومة سواء كانوا داخل السجون سواء عمل قتلهم وإعدامهم، يرفض إعطاء أي معلومة. يعني الملف بالنسبة للاحتلال مغلق، فيش مجال للحكي فيه. يعني
بمجرد أن كنا نرتدي زي الصحافة بريس كانت هذه التهمة الأكبر، أن ترتدي زيك الصحفي وأن تذيع خبر المجزرة وأن توثقه كان تشبيها بأنك استشهادي. أن تنتقل إلى مكان المجزرة في الساعة 2 مساء ليلا وأن توثق هذه المجزرة ومن ثم أن تنتقل، كنت يعني لم أتخيل بأنني على قيد الحياة حتى هذه اللحظات بعد ذلك المشهد. يعني أستيقظ في الساعة 2 على أصوات الانفجارات متتالية، أذهب أصور مجزرة في أحد مراكز بيت حانوت، في أحد مراكز الشمال، مراكز الإيواء، أنتقل لأعتلي ما يزيد عن 15 طابقا من البرج، لكن ليس برجا، ليس مبنى، بل أصعد على أعمدة الكهرباء، وربما أصعد تينة الإنترنت في أحد مراكز اللواء، أعتليها يعني متسلقا.
لماذا يفعل الصحفيون الفلسطينيون ذلك؟ لماذا يتكبدون كل هذا العناء وكل هذه المخاطرة؟
حرصا على نقل هذه الجرائم. العائلات ترى أملها بنا، كل المواطنين في ظل غياب الصحفيين والمؤسسات الدولية، كل العائلات كان أملها بنا. يعني نحن نذبح ولا صوت لنا، نحن نقتل ولا أحد يسمعنا ولا أحد يرانا، كل صورة كان لها مقابل. نحن دفعنا أجسادنا وروحنا ودفعنا كل شيء مقابل هذه الصورة أن تصل للعالم أجمع بأننا شعب يعيش تحت احتلالا منذ 70 عاما وما يزيد. الاحتلال لم يبدأ منذ 7 أكتوبر، المجازر لم تبدأ منذ 7 أكتوبر. كنا يعني نحرص على نقل عدم إنسانية جيش الاحتلال.
Next video, Witness Eye testimony, is about attacks on the dead and the unborn.
الاحتلال حتى الذين دفناهم في مقبرة البطش، طفلي عبيدة، زوجتي دعاء، ومعهم عشرات بل مئات بل آلاف الشهداء. الاحتلال في الحرب البرية ذهب إلى هذه المقبرة، جرفها تماما
يا الله،
ونكل بدثامين الشهداء. أنا لم أرى ولا أعرف الآن، أنت بتكلميني أنا الآن وأنا لا أعرف لا دثمان زوجتي ولا دثمان ابني وين، ومش عارف هم شو سوى الاحتلال فيهم. وأنا طبعا أتحدث بلسان حالي ولسان حال آلاف عوائل الشهداء اللي فقدوا دثامين أبنائهم مش عارفين هم وين راحوا. هل ذهبوا إلى الاختبارات عند الاحتلال؟ هل دفنهم في مكان ما؟
كنت نقطة تحويل من مستشفى الشفاء، وكنت لوحدي أعمل إجهاضات للستات اللي يموتوا ببطنهم البيبيات من القصف، تكون بالسابع أو بالسادس.
لماذا كانت تحدث هذه الحالات؟ لماذا قد يتوفى الجنين داخل الرحم؟
طبيعي الأم بتكون برين إنجري، يعني انقصفت، قعدت تحت الردم وطلعوها من تحت الأنقاض. طبيعي بنقص عليها الأكسجين، وكانت إصابات بالغة في الدماغ أغلبهم أو في البطن. فطبيعي بتأثر الجنين، فكان يموت ببطنها الطفل. طبيعي لازم يعني تعملي لها اجهاض عشان يبدوا يعملوا، لو بدهم يدخلوها اي شيء يعني مش حيقعدوا يعملوا اشياء وهي ببطنها بيبي متوفي يعني.
طبعا
كونه حيزيد المشكله يعني.
صحيح.
عند الام جابوها بسياره الاسعاف، كانت لغايه باب المستشفى. حكالي اللي هو المسعف انها كانت انه تتكلم معهم يعني لحد باب المستشفى، بعدها استشهدت. فاحنا عندنا قاعده طبيه اذا بتقدري تطلعي البيبي بخلال 8 دقائق من وفاه الام بيقدر يعيش. فانا طبيعي اول ما حكالي هذا الحكي على طول اخذت المشرط وقعدت على الارض وفتحت بطنها وعملت لها قيصريه بري مورتم، وطلعت البيبي، وقعدت انا وزملاتي نحاول نعمل له ريسستيشن وننقذه. البيبي تقريبا قعدنا نص ساعه واحنا ننقذ بالبيبي، وفعلا البيبي لونه تحسن وصار بمبي وصار يبكي. بعد ما صار يبكي وكثير انبسطنا. مع الاسف فوجئنا انه بطنه عم تنتفخ، وطلعنا فلقيت في شظايا تخيلي داخله من الام للرحم للبيبي، في ثقوب في عند الرئه، في ظهره، في البطن، عند الكليه. مع الاسف البيبي فقدناه بسبب النزيف الداخلي.
من المفارقات يعني المستشفى تحمل الكثير من القصص المحزنه والسعيده. يعني تذكر احد القصص المحزنه، ام لا تشعر بحركه طفلها. يعني انا ارجع باسباب لك ان تتخيلي لا يوجد نظام صحي، بالتالي الام ليست الام ليست في رفاهيه ان تذهب الى الطبيب وتتابع الحمل. لا يوجد تغذيه صحيه، لا يوجد فيتامينات، لا يوجد ادويه، لا يوجد الكثير.
خوف ورعب مستمر.
صحيح. اتت الام، انا لا اشعر بحركه الطفل. لا انسى هذا الموقف. الام كانت في الشهر التاسع من الحمل، يعني على اوج الولاده. اخبرني الدكتور ان اقوم بفحصها على جهاز الالتراساوند، بالتصوير. قمت بفحص الام، لا اجد ضربات الجنين. يعني توقعت بدرجه كبيره ان الام فقدت الطفل.
نعم.
الام صارت تخبرني هل هناك شيء، ماذا يوجد، لا تخفي عني اي شيء، ما تخبي علي، بلغه الام ما تخبي علي، ايش فيه؟ قول لي يا دكتور. طمأنتها، الله يسامحني.
كنت يعني لسه في عندك امل.
طمأنتها. لا، مثل هذه الحالات اصلا ينبغي ان يكون هناك حكمان من اطباء او طبيب مختص، وانا لست مختصا، لكن توقعت، اخبرت الدكتور الموجود هناك. لم اجد نبض الجنين. الدكتور تفاجأ، ذهب ليفحصها مرارا تكرارا، لم يجد نبض الجنين.
After everything that we have heard so far, it's time to open a session for questions and answers. Members of the jury, good morning. And yes, if you have questions, go on.
Yes, I would like to say, as an ex-journalist, that the responsibility, that the complicity of the Western media should not be termed complicity, but responsibility. Because no war can be done without the preparation of an opinion. And nobody is going to kill its neighbor unless he's persuaded by the publicity media that the neighbor is a dangerous animal who wants to kill him or to exterminate its civilization or its culture. And no war will be possible. No crime of the kind of what happens would be possible without the preparation of the opinion, because normal human being, is not going to kill his neighbor without a very strong reason. So, of course, I think it's responsibility of the media, but not only of the journalists, because journalists who oppose that are expelled under other pretexts, of course. But we must know, for instance, in France, but I suppose it's the same all over, I heard it's the same all over, that the medias are totally owned. There is very few independent medias, very, very few. They are owned by big corporations, which are very near to the government. And we know that the French government, for instance, has been selling more weapons to Israel these 2 last years than it has since 10 years. So there is a lot of economic, as it was said, interest. And the media, which is not free, is reflecting this economic interest and has a responsibility to shape opinion which prepare the war and aggression.
Thank you. Do we have questions? Yes, go on. Yeah.
Are the two in-person speakers, are they present? Are they present here? Have they gone? They're here. Okay. Well, the 2 questions then. The first question to about the media. Do you distinguish between different outlets? Are some US publications more or liberal, let's say, more fair, even-handed than the New York Times? That's the question about the media. And the second question was about academia, which is, I wondered how extensive the speaker spoke about the suppression of pro-Palestinian voices, the promotion of pro-Israel type information. How pervasive is this? Can we say this applies over most universities and colleges in the United States, or are we talking about a specific number? I didn't get an idea about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Katie, please.
Do you have time?
And Ms. Mora, too.
Excuse me, do you have time for other questions? Or?
Yes, of course. As soon as we get the answers, you will get the time or chance to ask the questions.
Because the 2 also will be asked questions.
It's okay.
So obviously, with only 10 minutes, I didn't have time to go into the details sufficiently of which outlets are the most culpable. And I totally agree, by the way, that it is responsibility, and something I tried to express, but perhaps not effectively, given the time limits, was that without these dehumanizing narratives, you wouldn't have consent for genocide, right? That's why, like, the dehumanization of Hamas as savage animals who run around raping, as opposed to Israeli soldiers who would never rape, is how the West, I think, one of the ways that consent is manufactured in the West. And I think the fact that they don't cover the actual documented rape is because that would contradict that narrative. In terms of which outlets are better, I mean, one of the things, there's actually a fascinating study that I'll link to in my document that looks at the way during the first 6 months of the coverage from the New York Times, LA Times, and Washington Post, there's a quantifiable analysis of the way those outlets downplayed crimes against Palestinians. Another thing is that the Sunday morning news shows is a very important source, and you can see that they have no Palestinian guests. Occasionally you will have articles that are more responsible. As I mentioned, the New York Times did finally talk about the sexual assault of a prisoner at State Teman, but as I also mentioned, didn't describe it as rape or sexual violence. So I think they all work hand in hand to create this kind of, complicity, responsibility. Really, like, they act as stenographers in many cases for the Israeli government. And then the American government cites that media to repeat those claims. I don't know if there's time, but I have 2 clips that are less than a minute each that shows exactly how Dana Bash at CNN makes the same point that Netanyahu makes. I don't know if you would like me to enter that in. They're prepared if you would. Okay. Could we play 1 and 2? Thank you.
Be very useful.
Thank you.
What you just saw is 2024 in Los Angeles.
Oh, sorry.
Harkening
Can you
back
pause
to
that
the
1 second? I'm sorry.
1930s in
I
Europe.
have to introduce
I do
this. I'm
not
so
say
sorry.
that lightly.
So one of
fear among
the
Jews-
narratives that we've seen perpetuated by the media, and I actually was going to talk about this, but I didn't have time, is the claim that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And one of the ways this was communicated was through the representation, the presentation of the encampments, the student protests and the encampments, as anti-Semitic, as violent, as vitriolic. And if you look at the actual, and I made a video about this I can link to, if you look at the actual encampments, the student encampments, there was violence, there was racism, there was vitriolic speech, but it was on the part of the pro-Israel protesters. And you saw people using the N-word, you saw protesters, pro-Israel protesters, impersonating a black woman by making monkey sounds, you saw people spitting, there were rodents released, there were people attacked with planks of wood. Violence was perpetuated against the protesters, but the protesters were subjected to violence perpetuated by pro-Israel protesters, and the victims of violence were pro-Palestine violence. And the victimizers were both pro-Israel protesters and the police. And as you'll see here, these protests were framed as examples of anti-Semitism. And they totally ignored the fact that the real victims of violence were the pro-Palestine protesters. So here we're going to hear Dana Bash and Netanyahu make this very similar point, and you'll see how irresponsible it is.
Mm-hmm.
What you just saw is 2024 in Los Angeles, harkening back to the 1930s in Europe, and I do not say that lightly. The fear among Jews in this country is palpable right now.
Okay, so that's Dana Bash talking about an LA student encampment, and next we have Benjamin Netanyahu speaking about the encampments.
What's happening on America's college campuses is horrific. Anti-Semitic mobs have taken over leading universities. They call for the annihilation of Israel. They attack Jewish students. They attack Jewish faculty. This is reminiscent of what happened in German universities in the 1930s.
So, to clarify, there were some Jewish students and Jewish faculty who were attacked, but those Jewish faculty members and Jewish students were the ones protesting for Palestine, not the ones protesting in defense of Israel. And then you had an instance of a Jewish professor who had been a professor of Jewish studies who was trying to protect and call out a physical attack on a student, and she was herself thrown to the ground. This Jewish professor was thrown to the ground by the police for trying to stop physical attacks on students. So again, you have a total, and I say this as a Jewish person, I'm not the right type of Jew, right? And Dr. Finkelstein, you're not the right type of Jew, which is why she was fired and why I've been censored. And I want to be clear that, my treatment pales in comparison to the treatment of Palestinian Americans, and I won't even deign to mention the treatment of Palestinian journalists who, as we know, have been systematically targeted. And with the silence of Western media, which gives permission for their colleagues to be systematically targeted. And I think we actually maybe need a word like journocide or mediacide to describe Israel's targeting of the media, because, of course, along with the targeting of healthcare workers, the targeting of media allows this perpetuation of atrocity propaganda. And the atrocity of killing these journalists is covered up because their media colleagues in the West do not talk about it. And of course, the atrocities committed by Israel against Palestinians are covered up because they cannot be covered by journalists. The fact that you would never know, ever know, from that and those sound bites, that Jews played a large role, and Jewish students played a large role in the encampments. And I'm not saying this to give ourselves credit. I'm saying this because that is a very inconvenient narrative that contradicts the claim that these were anti-Semitic protests. They don't tell you the fact that there were Shabbat dinners held at these encampments. There was a Passover Seder held at these encampments. And so every time the media engages in these tropes, they are spreading the lie that anti-Zionism, is anti-Semitism, and that's another way to manufacture consent. And it also manufactures consent by vilifying the American representatives of Hamas. That's how they're framed, right? So like Hamas goes around raping people because they want to kill all Jews, according to the media, and then Hamas, and everyone can be Hamas, right? Because there's never any evidence of proof. And then the supporters of Palestinians are people who want to kill Jews, basically, and are Nazi-like. And that is so important that both Dana Bash and Netanyahu compared them to Nazis. Because what manufactures consent more than the idea that people who are in support of Palestine are Nazi-like? Okay, sorry if I went over.
Thank you for the question. I'll try to be as brief as possible. I can provide a very, very, very short list later for the jury, if you're interested, of the very few schools who have committed or at least made promises to divestment, the handful of schools who have allowed encampments to happen. They're usually quite small, they're not high profile, they don't have big donors. And so I think if we're talking about the schools that have actually allowed for vocal support for Palestine divestment, they're the exception that proves the rule. That is almost all schools across the United States, especially large state universities, Ivy League schools, and Ivy adjacent schools, which are actually not schools. They're hedge funds and real estate development companies that offer classes. They have been extremely repressive. And so when we're thinking about the few schools and the few administrators that have allowed for protests and divestment, it reflects the fact that that is actually not the norm in the United States. The norm is in complete repression, and these administrators are becoming more and more creative in obfuscating the actual crime of denouncing genocide to violating procedure, violating policy, and sort of hiding everything within secrecy. Many faculty, staff, and students who are accused of anti-Semitism, i.e. supporting Palestine and denouncing genocide, now have to sign NDAs before they can enter into any kind of adjudicated procedure, which means that we're not getting that data. But thank you for your question. I can provide more data if you'd like.
Thank you, very helpful.
We do have time for one brief question more, so go on. Yeah, well, yeah. In order for you to have a coffee break and get some rest before we start our next session.
Okay, I had one for each, but...
only Ms. Ibtikhal is with us, and our two speakers that are physically present, the rest of them had to leave, so...
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me just get to the one, and then I will ask both speakers, if possible, if they can give us recommendations on what they would like to see for each. But this has been a very powerful session. I really appreciate it. Is Mr. Dabashi there, or is he gone?
No, he left.
Okay, all right. Okay, so for Mora, 24 years ago, when I was targeted, all professional organizations, media, they came defending academic freedom. Now, we see that mostly they get away with it. Where are the professional organizations, the AUP, the other professional organizations? Remember, there's scores of them. They were coming very forcefully. It seems like this part of academic organizations, professional organizations has gone. Are they also infiltrated? And then the other thing is, I wanted to give to Lily. Is she around or no? No. She's gone?
No.
I'd like to know what kind of pressure are we talking about? Is it threats? Is it political? How do they apply that kind of pressure? Is it ideological? If any of the speakers here can tell us, when they say Zionist pressure, what are we talking about here? It's particularly for government workers. Are they just silenced and without any explanation, or is there any kind of, or is it withholding certain privileges? If these kind of things could be told, would be nice. And finally, for Ibtihal, is there any legal action that can be taken against these corporates, particularly tech, because these are private companies, and certainly if they are complicit in certain policies that are against the law, I'm sure there would be some kind of legal action, and have they looked into that?
Thank you. Ms. Abu Saad, have you heard the question?
Yes, I have. Thank you. I think certainly there is potential for legal action. Like the ground is laid for that. I think I guess like a barrier or an obstacle is just the decentralized nature of a lot of these corporations having, for example, an HQ in the United States, but the data center that hosts Palestinians like phone calls in the Netherlands, and then the operations in Israel. And so that is the challenge that I'm aware groups are trying to navigate, is the I guess international nature that form their operations, but I know for a fact that certain labor movement groups have started to look at this, especially in light of Francesca Albanese's recent report that mixes like international law with these companies' complicity. I think that is an avenue that we are trying to explore more, and that should be explored more on the part of international lawyers that are working on addressing complicit parties.
Thank you very much. And I'm calling Pumora to give us another answer.
Thank you for that question. So really quickly, AAUP National has been quite good in, I think that folks at AAUP National, the Middle East Studies Association, I imagine that people in leadership in those organizations have basically made it their full-time job to be writing letters and advocating on behalf of all of the faculty, staff, and students who are getting suspended and fired. And they're doing incredible research in collaboration with each other and other advocacy organizations across the country to make this data known and sort of think about defense strategies, and so that is happening in the US. I would say professional organizations are much more inconsistent across the board. So historically, MESA has been very good. American Studies Association has been very good. I think when they passed a boycott, they were actually sued by Hillel International, but they continue to do their work. I'm an anthropologist, and so I can say that in some ways, the American Anthropological Association has been supportive in the sense that they wrote a letter on my behalf denouncing my termination, but they wouldn't make it about Palestine. They made it about academic freedom. And I think that's what we're seeing being sort of obfuscated in a lot of the work of these academic organizations, is that they do not want to actually name what is at stake here. They want to make it about academic freedom as though it's a sort of uniform kind of thing. And I will say that the American Anthropological Association passed an academic boycott a few years ago, and members of the organization have recently called it back into question, and it's going to be voted on next week. So we make progress and then we get pulled back. I think there's Zionists at the heart of all of these organizations. So, thanks.
If the jury is okay with it, I wanted to respond to Dr. Al-Arian's question about recommendations. Someone I actually wanted to cite, and he's been cited a lot at this tribunal, is of course the late Rafat Al-Arir. And one of the things that he said to me, we were direct messaging on Twitter a couple months before he was killed by Israel in a targeted attack. I asked him how he was, how his family was. He told me, and then I said, is there anything we can do from here? And he said, thank you for offering more pressure on the media, more coverage, more Palestinian voices, more protests. Hopefully Israel is curbed ASAP. And I want to convey that message, but it also answers Dr. Al-Arian's question, because the more Palestinian voices are amplified and the more Palestinians are in the media, the more they are humanized. And I know that's a dangerous thing in some ways to even say, but the reality is they are so dehumanized. And one example of that is that Jake Tapper at CNN, who's one of the worst, along with Dana Bash, in perpetuating the notion that anti-Zionism or any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. He's smeared Rashid Tlaib, the only Palestinian member of Congress, as anti-Semitic. The one time he challenged an Israeli official, Mark Regev, was when Mark Regev basically blamed, and that's the Rafat Larir quote, by the way, was when Mark Regev blamed a Palestinian American producer's family for getting itself killed, basically, by not evacuating. And Jake Tapper said, where were they supposed to go? And this was a unique moment in which Jake Tapper at all challenged an Israeli source. And that was because he had empathy for this producer. It was a Palestinian American producer's family which had been killed. That empathy is non-existent usually. So the more, that's why Rafat says, you know, more Palestinian voices. And that's one of the recommendations that I think I would make, which is that more Palestinian elevating Palestinians will help craft this manufactured consent. Thank you.
Okay, one more. You have to turn, yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I would like to know if there is a law in other countries assimilating anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism and punishing it, because in France they've been trying since quite a time, and with Mr. Macron recently, to pass a law telling anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism can be condemned, can be punished by jail. So if this law passes in France, somebody who is anti-Zionist can go to jail. I want to know if in other countries these laws have been passed.
Thank you.
I'm not a legal scholar, so I can't entirely speak to this, but one thing that I think is really important to note is that in the United States, in addition to Trump's executive orders, there is a reopening of terrorist designations. So what we're seeing right now is a lot of really critical advocacy work and organizing work. Leaders are being targeted and accused of terrorism. And so it's not exactly that they're being charged with anti-Zionism, but they're being charged with, you know, the Heritage Foundation has created this fictional Hamas support network through their Project Esther that came out last year. And so anyone who is doing this work can be accused of being part of the Hamas network, and you know, when the terrorist designations are reopened, I think we're going to see, you know, catastrophic accusations and imprisonments.
I would say that another comparable case, perhaps worse than France, but I don't know about France enough, I would say that another place where it's very repressive and there's a lot of penalization of anti-Zionism, although not officially, would be England, where we see these anti-terror laws being used to punish not just Palestinian action, which engages in direct action against Elbit systems, but you are no longer allowed to express support for Palestinian action because it's a proscribed organization, so you can be arrested for expressing support for Palestine action. In the United States, there is the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's recommendation to equate. What it says is that it has a working definition of anti-Semitism. By the way, the person who created the IHRA laments how it's being used and says it's being misused. But their working definition of anti-Semitism includes in its definition of anti-Semitism comparing Israel's contemporary actions to the actions of the Nazis and singling out Israel as a racist project. But now the United States obviously has a unique, in theory, protection of free speech in the First Amendment. Mahmoud Khalil was kidnapped because of alleged support of Hamas. And his support of Hamas was non-existent, but he was one of the negotiators for the student encampment. And the way that he was smeared was as pro-Hamas. And in fact, Marco Rubio, the State Department, pretended, this is a lie, that as a green card holder and not a citizen, he is deprived of First Amendment rights. Now, that's not in the Constitution. It's very clear that you don't actually have to be a citizen. But so that's how we're seeing the a criminalization of support for Palestinian rights, which is framed as pro-Hamas.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our jury members. Thank you to our speakers. This was very intense and it was very useful, obviously considering the number of the questions that we have. 15 minutes coffee break, and I will see you soon, hopefully on time, so we could start our next session.